Well, it's December 2020, a good chance to look back at a year I think few of us will regret having in the rear vision mirror. This is my take on some of the big things, big changes I saw happen in 2020 in the watch industry, including the guys that make watches and the guys and the girls that talk about watches. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches, and this is my retrospective on 2020 in the watch world. I've got 14 points to rattle through. Why 14? No particular reason. These are just the things that sort of came to me as I was walking through here. Start with number one. 2020 in terms of a watch world was more chaotic than I could have possibly imagined. There was a couple of things that had been happening for a few years that, shows and like Baselworld had kind of been winding down anyway. More and more micro brands were coming on board, releasing watches whenever it suited them, not necessarily with some rhythm in mind. Throw on top of that, which was already happening, the whole pandemic, which led to the wholesale shutting down of everything else that was in fact still in place, and uncertainty about when things would get released and how things would get released. And this year just became a complete rock show in terms of release dates and timings, and it was just really chaotic and very difficult to get your arms around. Certainly I was normally at this time of year, I'd be looking back and going best divers or best pilot watches or best watches under certain values. I found it nightmarishly difficult to even try and compile those lists, given the way the year had kind of just evolved so organically. Interestingly, I think this is something that's going to continue probably for at least another year, possibly forever. So maybe for ordinary consumers, no big deal. But for people like me, content creators, maybe that's something I should pay attention to and come up with a way of better tracking what's happening during a year and collating that. Because I'll tell you right now, sitting here in December trying to look back at what happened, it's just chaos, and there's no way that I've found of gripping it all up and retrospectively trying to figure out what happened in terms of when watches were released and how they were released. And no, it's just been really weird that way. Okay, point number two, I would say that even though it's been more chaotic, we're getting less watches released, but they're better watches and certainly more expensive watches than in the past. In the past, look, it's still happening. Tudor roll out the Royale with 150 SKUs. That's kind of archaic. That's a bit unusual. More and more this year, we saw watch companies releasing pretty tight, pretty disciplined little collections. So, Breitling will roll out the Chronomat series and they'll have like 12 SKUs. That's it. They'll roll out, then you'll have Omega will roll out lots and lots of like limited editions, but they're tight and they're constrained, and it's like one or two watches or one watch, not one new watch catalog with 37 different varieties. I think so I think we saw that a lot. I think it was the pandemic probably lent on that a bit, but it was possibly something that was developing for a little while. And look, I've done a whole video on why the watch community, why watch prices are moving up. I think that combines with the idea of getting slightly less watches, but in more disciplined, more contained, better articulated collections. The next thing I would say is color. Whilst I did say we're getting less watches and perhaps less SKUs across the board, we are also seeing way more color choices, whether it's dark blues or light blues or turquoises, deep greens, mint greens, reds, pinks, way more color choices than ever before, or at least certainly not in my time, certainly not for probably 15, 20 years have we seen this variety of color coming out from every brand at every price point. The next thing I would say is that we're seeing an increasing emphasis on the environment and sustainability. Again, this is something that's been coming for a while, And I suspect that the whole COVID thing, and we're all in this together, and a lot of people sort of sitting back and reconsidering their place, has really put an emphasis on, as I said, the environment and sustainability. So whether it's Breitling with its collapsible packaging, or Oris with little reclaimed fishing net discs and watch bands across the board, and I'm picking two brands out, but there's many brands. Alpina with the Gaia, and it's kind of plastic, reclaimed plastic watch cases. This is just becoming de rigueur, an expectation through this year, and I can't see that going away. The next thing I would say is, along the same lines, unisex. 2020 is the year that brands really started looking hard at what's a more sophisticated and a more useful way of selling our watches to everyone with all of the different competing desires. You've got men who want you've got men who want kind of more smaller watches, women who want larger watches, men who are getting more and more comfortable with what you might call feminine coded colors like pinks and turquoises and mint greens, women who are getting more and more comfortable with plainer dials without the diamonds and things we might have expected in the past. However, at the same time, we've also got women who do want to see watches that are developed specifically for them, that do have something which is uniquely and aimed towards women. And likewise with men. And we're seeing the brands really trying to figure out how to juggle that. I think Zenith did that really well at the beginning of the year. I think Breitling's been doing that well through this year. I think Breitling has done something really interesting in that space only in the last couple of weeks. If you look at their website, for a long time Breitling didn't have a men's and a women's section. It recreated that, which caught me by surprise. But what's actually interesting is if you go down through the men's and women's watches, 80% of the watches overlap. It's less that there's a men's collection and a women's collection. Rather, they're just presenting the watches to help someone who's interested in the idea of a woman's watch being funneled towards the kinds of watches across the entire catalogue that would potentially suit them. So they're not saying this is uniquely a women's watch, but rather it's a way of getting women to look at a watch that could be unisex. Really interesting. Breitling certainly aren't the only ones doing it. I just happen to be a fanboy of that brand. I'm sure lots of other brands are doing something similar. I know Zenith, when they released their watches earlier in the year, certainly lent very lightly on men's and women's, and were largely just, these are unisex watches which cue a little bit more masculine or feminine. And I think that's something that we saw much more of this year. I should really say, I think Omega are doing similar things with their OP line as well. So, sorry, not Omega, what am I talking about? I think Rolex are doing similar things with their OP line, backing away from the idea that we're going to tell you that this is a man's watch or a woman's watch. Make it more gender neutral, let them skew a little bit one way or the other, but leave it up to the audience, leave it up to the collector to decide which category they want to put it in. What else have we got? I would say that the Swiss have begun to join the rest of us in the 21st century. This is the most obvious outcome of the pandemic. Not being able to have the shows, not being able to shop at brick and mortar stores. The Swiss have had no choice but to go online, to embrace online content development, most of which has been really great, and it's something that I think we can look forward to. I think it's actually had a paradoxical effect as well, though, in that as the Swiss watch industry in particular has got better at this, what it's actually also done is ramped up the hype engine so that now nothing sneaks out. Everything comes out and it's known by everyone, and it's got a fair bit of push. And so increasingly you're getting more and more hyped up watches. And interestingly, combine that with the earlier point that they're making less watches. So you're getting companies making less watches, more expensive watches, better watches, and those watches are being more hyped, being leaked out better using social media. And I think one of the things that you'd also say this year is there are more and more hyped watches, more and more watches that are getting harder and harder to get, which is another sort of feature of 2020, which I'm not sure how I feel about. And I kind of would like to see it go away in some ways next year. The other thing I would say, the final thing I'd say about the watch industry, the watchmaker side of it, is there's a real stability and cohesiveness now building up around the micro brand space. I think 2020 saw those micro brands that were established really dig in deep roots and become really quite sustainable in the community. I think we saw that the entry to the successful area of micro brands is getting harder and harder. And I also think that matched with that, the definition of what a micro brand is really becoming pretty loose. As those brands are now becoming established, are becoming well known and sustainable over the long term, I think many of them are still keen to keep their micro brand roots. Other brands which have been around for a while are actually keen to identify as micro brands, and what you might call true micro brands, true startups, are kind of getting squeezed out of the market. And I think 2020, I predicted this happening in 2019, and I think in 2020 we saw that really starting to come to fruition. Okay, so now moving away from kind of the watchmaking and selling part, although not completely from the selling part, let's now talk about the media. And the first thing I would say is, for me, 2020 is the year that we stopped having watch journalists. There is, I think now, if you look at the pro media, Revolution, Worn and Wound, Hodinkee, those guys, call me, some of you are going to call me a cynic, some of you are going to call me like overly naive. But I think 2020 is the year that we can say, look, these guys just gave up being journalists. They gave up any pretense of any sort of critical analysis of watches or the watch industry. This is the year where they just said, look, we are infotainment. We are here for clicks and views, and increasingly we are here as adjuncts to the watch companies, if not even directly their retailers. Most of those brands that I mentioned, most of those big outlets that I mentioned, are now significant retailers of watches themselves. And I think in that's I personally find that really sad. I think that there's like I said, 2020 for me is the year that we can put a line through the idea that there's any such thing as serious watch journalism, and we just have infotainment. The other thing I would say is that across the watch media, I would say there's a real weariness about some topics. This is both in professional and especially in the social media space. There's a real weariness developing. Okay, so we all acknowledge that Rolex is king, but within that, if you dig one step down, whether it's a Facebook group or a forum group or whatever, you can see that there's more and more people, getting tired of the constant talk about Rolex. But conversely, there's more and more people within the Rolex camp getting tired of people talking about how tired they are about, the Rolex. Likewise with the word homage. There's more and more people getting tired of just how many homage watches there are. And then on the flip side, there's more and more people getting tired about, we've had this discussion, you don't like homages, fine, just move on. I think this is the year, 2020 for me was the year where I think the huge growth in social media watch participation of a couple of years ago has kind of matured now into a significant body of people who have had a lot of these conversations, who have been listening to these conversations for a long time and are just tired of them coming back over and over again. I don't know what that's going to mean moving forward, and I think now might be a terrible time to be a newcomer into the community, because you're going to be really interested and want to talk about all these things and get this bombardment of, God, we don't want to talk about this anymore. But yeah, I sensed a real weariness and a real frustration and a lack of tolerance in the watch community about some of these older topics that just keep coming up. What I would say is also podcasts have continued to grow. The huge explosion of growth, though, of 2018 and 19 in the podcast community has kind of tailed off. It's steadier now. And in particular, what you're seeing is a lot of people who had media outlets in one space now creating or expanding their podcasts as well. So you're seeing Fratello and Monochrome and people that so maybe those channels themselves now creating podcasts, or what you're seeing is people who were in the other parts of the media leaving that media or adding to their adding strings to their bow through podcasts. So I think you're seeing a professionalization of the podcasting space, not unlike the professionalization that you're seeing certainly in YouTube. So getting from podcasts to now talking about what I've seen in YouTube, what I would say is huge change in 2020. The presenters have all got younger. They've all got way more entertaining and much more business-like. As someone who has a channel and kind of pays attention to this, you can almost see the numbers of the algorithm clicking in people's minds as they are developing a lot of their content now. It is very clearly chasing the YouTube algorithm for a lot of new and emerging brands. And so what you're seeing is those channels, those enthusiast channels, exploding in size. Lots of channels now with 100,000 and 200,000 plus communities, and those channels branching out beyond simply content creation and selling product as well, kind of mimicking what's going on in the pro media side. Maybe the line between the pro infotainment and the high end, really large channel YouTuber, really large subscriber enthusiast YouTubers is blurring a lot. The other thing you're seeing is with that, you're seeing a move away from a lot of the drama stuff that used to happen. So, the inter-channel drama stuff still exists, but it's now on a fairly small, kind of carved off part of the watch media. The rest of the watch media, the younger, more professional, more business-like media, is moving away from that and more moving into kind of reaction style videos. Now, watch community has always had that. In a sense, an unboxing is kind of a reaction video. But you're getting more and more kind of people within the watch world saying, watch me watch another video. You can watch me open a box. Not see the box being opened, but you can watch me unboxing something. So a lot of those outside of the watch community, those reaction videos are hugely popular. And you, again, as I said, you've got this younger, more professional, more algorithm driven, more entertainment driven kind of channel, which is just exploding. And you can see that kind of thing, which is popular out there outside of the watch community, coming into the watch community space. What else can I say? Oh yeah, I think I've already said this, production values have absolutely skyrocketed. You really want to be doing 4K. The kinds of photography that used to be regarded as exceptional is now de rigueur, is the expectation. More and more pro or pro level editing going on. And finally, again, younger, more entertainment, more infotainment, more business-like has also meant more kind of multi-channel coordination. So, there's always been a link between people with a YouTube channel also having Instagram, but now it's like you've got YouTube channel and an Instagram and a Facebook, and they're all tightly enmeshed. And you've possibly got TikTok as well, and some people are also starting to go out on Twitter, and they're all interactive and working quite closely together. And I think in 2020 you really saw that, which is, again, it's a trend that's been around for a while, but you saw it really start to harden up this year. The other thing that you'll notice is a lot more collaborations and cooperation between presenters, and not only between presenters, but between, if you like, presenters as a core and their writing groups, their support groups on the outside. Way more live streaming and discussions and so forth. Now, as someone, I've just recently taken part in some of these, and they're fun. They're huge fun. They're great. They're really easy to churn out because, you just circulate a list of topics beforehand. fire it up, and then just chat. So it's really easy to do. It's really enjoyable. It gets great interaction and great engagement with people. You know, the number of people that will watch them is quite small. If you see the view numbers, they're minuscule. You know, a viewer, a watch brand that might, or a watch channel whose videos might have 10,000 views, does a live stream and maybe 1,000 people watch it. But if you then compare the engagement, like the number of people that watched it all the way through, commented all the way through, compared to the number of people who might watch a video all the way through and then be so engaged as to leave a comment, you know, the engagement side of live streams is huge, and I don't think is going away. The last thing that I'm going to say, and this is possibly both the most positive and the most negative side of what I've seen in particularly the kind of lower end social media side, is massive increase in the involvement of brands with the enthusiast / social media side of the watch media in 2020. Suddenly this year, you've got, as those brands, as those watch channels have stepped up and become more and more professional looking, then the watch companies have been more and more willing to engage with them, provide them product, provide them access, provide them interviews, that sort of thing. The downside is that these people are really smart. They know their watches, but almost none of them are trained journalists or trained analysts. So a lot of them can market really well, can sell really well, can tell stories really well, but aren't particularly well trained or equipped, or frankly particularly motivated to do any kind of critical analysis, to dig into what's going on. And as a result, and I think a lot of them too, and I would certainly be in this case. Look, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. If George Kern rang me tomorrow and said, "Hey Pete, I'd like to come on your channel," I'd probably be a bit like this too. I think a lot of people get kind of starstruck, like, oh my God, someone's paying attention to me. And as a result, the interviews are kind of powder puffy. They're kind of extended press releases, advertorials. And I've found myself in the early part of the year being quite excited by a lot of these, big brands coming onto my area of the media, and by the end of the year getting really quite over it. It's like, oh, well, if I wanted to know that, I'd just read the press release. And I'm holding my breath to see what the future looks like moving forward. I think that for the enthusiast media, it is going to be a tricky thing moving, into 2020 and beyond. Some people might want to do more, to ask more, to be a bit more probing. But then there's the concern that if you do step into that space, what's to stop the big watch players simply saying, well, that's not what we're signing up for, and turning off your free watches, turning off your interviews, and you're back where you started. So I don't begrudge the people who are doing this. One, they're not trained professionals, and two, as an enthusiast, it's kind of fun to get this kind of access, and giving it up for, it would be, why would you? So I'm really not sure what the future holds in this space. I look forward to 2021 and beyond to see. So anyway, that's my wrap up for 2020. What about you? What do you think were the major things that you saw, good, bad, or indifferent? Did you see stuff that happened in 2020 that you hope you never see again? Did you see stuff that we were forced to do in 2020 that you actually love and would love to see moving forward? Let me know in the comments below. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.